Hey, everybody. So I got a little rattled on the 4th of July, and I didn't handle it as well as I would have liked to. And I mentioned this yesterday, and I promised that I would tell the story, so I'm going to tell it now. It happened because of a statement that a friend of mine made. It was a statement that, in the moment, it kind of took my breath away, and I couldn't even really begin to properly address it. So I want to head off some of the comments that I know are going to come in on this right at the start. So whenever I talk about my friends who disagree with me about Trump, I get quite a few people telling me that I shouldn't have friends who disagree with me about Trump. And all I can say to that is I just disagree. I mean, I have cut some obnoxious people out of my life, but relationships go deep, and I'm not willing to cut people out who just honestly disagree with me, but they're willing to talk about it. So anyway, I'm going to tell the story here in hopes that maybe if you run across a similar sort of statement, maybe you'll respond better than I did in the same situation. So this happened during our 4th of July get together, and I was sitting with three friends of mine, really close friends, and we've all got a lot of respect for each other, and we've got a wide range of political opinions. So I'm going to describe the guy who made the comment that sort of set me spinning. And when I describe him, it might sound unflattering to him, depending on your point of view, but I don't mean it that way. This is a really smart guy, and he just adds the world up differently from how I do. But I think I get where he's coming from. I get depressed when I try to add it up the way he does, but I think I understand him. And I don't know if he actively likes Donald Trump, but he definitely supports him right now. And I'm still getting my brain around his full point of view. But I think cynicism is the best word that I can use for the way that he thinks about politics, cynicism. I think it's fair to say that he trusts no one in politics. And he believes everybody is in it for themselves. And sure, like on the one hand, our founders did build a system of checks and balances based on skepticism about politicians to keep them in line. But on the other hand, I don't see my friend connecting the dots the same way that I do. The biggest difference between the two of us, I think, is that I am, that word I just used, I'm skeptical of politicians. So I want to strengthen the systems that would hold them accountable. But since he's gone all the way over now to cynicism, I think he just has no hope of reforming the system to create a more just or equitable way of organizing ourselves. So I think his stance might be something like, I hate to put words in his mouth, but it'd be something like, it's my job to protect my family and our interests within this permanently broken system. It's never going to get better. So anything else is just foolishness and wishful thinking. I think that might be where he's coming from. And he believes then, given that worldview, he believes a Donald Trump presidency aligns more with his interests than a Kamala Harris presidency would have. But he does strongly oppose Christian nationalism, so we're really aligned on that, and that's good. So we were having a nice conversation about all sorts of things, but little by little it started to get political, and I used to love that sort of thing, but I just don't anymore. And I came into this particular conversation really frazzled. Honestly, I haven't slept well since the assassination in the Twin Cities, and we were having this conversation just a few miles from where those attacks took place. And as someone who's actively spoken out for years against the exact religious movement that the shooter seems to have been affiliated with, I just haven't been sleeping well. So it's getting better, but it's been hard. So the conversations felt a lot more personal to me that day than they have in the past. I couldn't blow things off quite the way that I normally would. So things reached a boiling point when we started talking about immigration, and I finally kind of went off. And I sort of monologued for a few minutes. And I let them know, like well beyond the immigration issue, that was more sort of a jumping off point, but I let them know just how disappointed I was that not one of them had called me to see how I was doing after those shootings. And I sort of ripped them because I know they just didn't realize how threatened I might feel by the sorts of things that are happening. They just don't know, and sort of how painful that is, that I can't come to really close friends like that for support because they have no idea what I'm even talking about. And I was entirely truthful in everything I said, but I didn't tell them what was really bothering me. And so I'm going to get to that in a minute. But I couldn't find the words to explain what was really bothering me. So instead, I focused on something I believe. It's something that was present in the conversation. I did my diatribe basically on this one main thing, the religious extremism that I'm opposing. And I did that because I knew that every one of them would at least agree with me on that point about the religious extremism. And I connected the dots for them. I told them that there have always been religious extremists, but what's different now, and I say this as somebody who's been part of some of these movements, what's different now is that we've never had a president who elevates the extreme nut jobs. This is new. Trump is not a Christian. He despises actual Christians. So he sees Christians through the lens of a political movement. So, of course, since he sees Christians that way, he's going to elevate the ones who promise to work the hardest for him instead of working for Jesus, which means the most corrupt whack jobs in the country are now the most powerful Christians. So I told them all of that. I said all of that, and it was fine as far as it went. I came across a little bit insane, I think, because I was tired and I was upset. But they were super nice about it. And I think on that level, it was a good, helpful conversation. But here's what I failed to do. I failed to address the thing that really bothered me. And it was something that happened earlier in the conversation. So here it is. I'll tell you about it. We had been talking about AI. And we talked about how some lawsuits have been thrown into disarray lately because it turned out that a few lawyers used AI to write their arguments, and that AI actually got some things wrong, and it even hallucinated some cases that didn't even exist as precedent. So fair enough, that's a fascinating conversation, and I enjoyed that, but it went further than that. We started talking about the future of AI and how as it gets better and better, it might be harder to tell when AI is leading us astray. And so we returned to that court case example. And one of my friends was trying to make the case, and I agree with him, that in a court situation, a judge should have the tools to use to determine truth versus falsehood. Like in regard to legal precedents, for example, a judge doesn't have to just accept a brief from somebody. She can have her staff run down the precedents that are cited to make sure that they're not being hallucinated by the AI. But another one of my friends, the one who is more cynical about all of this, said that that's just not where the country's heading. And he said that our future is just going to be competing AIs. So the goal then, if that's the way it's going, the goal is to make sure that your group has the more powerful AI. And so my first friend, the first one, kept pressing on it, though, and saying that, no, truth and facts matter, and that there are always going to be judges who are going to determine that, and that they shouldn't be at the mercy of anyone's AI. And by the way, again, I'm 100% in agreement with them on this. But my other friend said several times that the first guy was basically just like a guy selling buggy whips. That just like the buggy whip, the search for truth, objective truth in that way is just going to become obsolete. And he said it enough times in enough different ways for me to know that he's serious about this. To his way of thinking, in the future, truth will be determined by the most powerful AI, not by whether it's objectively true or not. And again, we were talking in a legal context, but I think he would expand that out in a lot of ways. So the goal, if that's true, the goal, he was saying, is to make sure that your side has the most powerful AI, because someone's going to get that power. And once they do, then it's too late to do anything about it. And I think that he just really believes that that's the way the world is going. But that whole statement, that whole line of thinking just took my breath away. I mean, I can't describe the depth of how much this bothered me. So I just sat there in silence for a while. And I wanted to push back. I wanted to stand up for truth. But he's one of these guys who's really good at making these strong declarative statements And I'm not a strong declarative statement sort of a guy. I'm reading off a script right now because I don't think in such clear sound bites. I get eaten alive in debates. I think debates are stupid for the most part. I hate debates. I thrive in discussions, in long discussions where you can posit something and then, just have feedback, pushback, back and forth. But you're not debating. You're discussing. You're examining an issue from every possible angle. I thrive in that, but not debates, not strong declarative statements like that. So I realized, at least around that table in that moment, that I couldn't say anything that was going to change his perspective. So I sat there and I listened, and eventually I blew up and I talked about what I knew I could talk about, which is that religious extremism stuff that I already described. But what I wanted to say is that his statement undermines everything that I find beautiful. My whole worldview is based on the pursuit of truth. And I don't believe any of us can corner the market on truth, but I can make common cause with anyone who's seeking it out. So that's why I think on this channel, there are a lot of, I did that survey a couple weeks ago about who listens to the channel. And there, something like 18% of the 1,000 some people had answered are atheists or agnostic. And then there's people all across other religious, spectrums. And I think I'm so comfortable with anyone who is pursuing truth, and I don't care if they agree with me or not. What I want is that we're pursuing truth together. There's mystery, and the mystery in the world, I tend to view through a Christian lens, but I don't try to get anyone to accept my view about the mysteries of the world. But things that are provable, that we can come to agreement on, I'm with anyone who's trying to seek after that sort of truth. And the absolute centrality of truth is at the core of everything I do. It's at the core of both of my books, and it's at the core of every video I make, even if I don't talk about it. That's the assumption, is that I'm trying to pursue truth. So my second book, A Christian Case Against Donald Trump, has a major section on the fundamental importance of truth from a biblical standpoint. So to my mind, to dispense with truth is one of the most destructive things that a person can do. And that whole idea is at the core of my opposition to Trump. Donald Trump destroys the very idea of truth because the truth works against his ambitions. In my first book, I referenced an Atlantic article by McKay Coppins that talked about Donald Trump's billion-dollar disinformation campaign in the 2020 election. And the article quotes some Trump strategists who say almost exactly what my friend said about AI, except they said this 4 years ago, and they were talking about the media space. And they said again, Trump strategists, these are, okay? They said that it's not their job to put out the truth. It's their job to put out a narrative. And what's important is to make sure that their narrative gets heard much more powerfully than any competing narratives. That's very different from trying to get at truth. And Steve Bannon said it even more clearly. He famously said that his strategy is to flood the zone with shit, so people just tune out what they hear in the media. He wants to entirely discredit any media that tries to share the truth. That's Steve Bannon. And so when I've written about this, I've said that for a demagogue, it's not about choosing between truth and falsehood. Someone like Donald Trump, a demagogue, doesn't reflect, I think, for even a moment about whether something is true or false. It's not about what's true. It's about what makes him powerful. It's not truth versus falsehood. It's about truth versus power. And the demagogue is going to choose power over truth every time, because once you have the power, then you get to decide what's true. So this is one of the main reasons that I call MAGA a fascist movement, because in fascist movements, truth is whatever serves the interests of the leader. And it's taken me a long time to comprehend the level of wickedness of a guy like Steve Bannon. I just don't like to believe that anyone could be so cynical and so power hungry. And when I heard the same worldview that Bannon puts out there and these others put out there, operating around a table over beers at a 4th of July celebration, I was just stunned and I didn't know how to respond to that. But it showed me just how deep the MAGA cynicism goes. These are people, I think, a lot of them in the MAGA movement, who've given up on the political system. And I understand why on some level. I do understand a lot of their concerns. They've given up on a system that they think is corrupt. So what they want to do is to seize control of the parts of the system that they think might still do them some good, like maybe law enforcement and the military. But they want to burn the rest of it down because they think that it's corrupt beyond repair and that it's just pushing an agenda that doesn't serve their interests. And I don't know what I'd even say to my friend about this because he understands so much of it already, of what I would say. He's just adding it up differently. Like, for instance, in the same conversation, he talked about how most countries are run by corrupt families who just pull the levers of power to enrich themselves. And I want to say, yes, that's exactly right. And that's what this guy is doing. It's what he's trying to do, to make us like those countries. And it doesn't have to be that way. The best way that I can understand what he's saying is that this is just the way the world works. So this is my friend, I'm saying, that he's saying that this is the way the world works. And again, I'm putting all these words in his mouth, but I think I'm adding it up pretty close to what he would agree with. So he'd say that it's his responsibility, since the world works this way, to work within that system to protect his family and their interests. And here's where I disagree. I don't see how any of that corruption is inevitable. I think we have a system of checks and balances that allow us to do better. So instead of accepting the corrupt system and trying to work inside of it, I'm trying to fix it so it works for everybody. Even in a world where AI, for instance, is a major force that we have to learn to deal with. I'd want to remind him of what he already knows, that those people who build the stronger AI, and now I'm using AI as a stand-in here for everything about our political system. I'd want to say that the people who are building that stronger, truthless AI, or the unaccountable government without the checks and balances that the MAGA movement's burning down, they aren't planning to serve his interests. They're only planning to enrich and empower themselves. And any temporary gain that he might see by supporting people like that, by riding that wave, is going to be wiped out by the fact that he's helping to empower people who have no love for him, no love for his family, and no love for his country. And when he says something like he said about judges, that the ones who would seek after the truth are going to become a thing of the past, I think that he's undermining, whether he means to or not, he's undermining the last vestige of an imperfect but beautiful system, a system that was designed almost 250 years ago, a system that was meant to protect him and his family and his country against the sorts of people who would dispense with truth and justice. And so finally, I think I would ask him to meditate on this quote from 1951 from Hannah Arendt in her book, The Origins of Totalitarianism. She wrote, "The ideal subject of totalitarian rule is not the convinced Nazi or the dedicated communist, but people for whom the distinction between fact and fiction, true and false, no longer exists." So thanks for listening.